Hello, this is Burklow here. We have Brandon Joseph at 680. And where are you right now? I'm in recording from Athens, Georgia.
I'm actually recording from Kennesaw.
Okay, so obviously the last year, things have been very different. So, how would you say 680 has been like during the current pandemic?
Well, it's been, like everybody else, I think we've all had to adjust and been affected by it. But luckily, for us at 680, we've been in a position where we do a lot of mobile broadcasts anyway. So when the time came and, shows weren't in studio and talent was broadcasting from home, it was actually fairly easy for us to get guys rigs to go home and to broadcast from the house. And we have a good group of guys who are accustomed to working on the fly and dealing with, you know, curveballs as they may come. And they were pretty cool about it. We have a great engineer, Mike Rand, at the station who can, rig anything and get the guys up and going. So, from a producer standpoint, somebody who was still able, to go into the building and try to have a little bit of normal day to day during all of it. It was really strange because, you'd go weeks without seeing talent. And but your job was still the same. You still had to prep the shows the same and still execute the same, even though everybody else seemingly was working from home. But we didn't really necessarily feel the pandemic when it first started, because for us, the producers and the engineers, we were still going into the office every day.
So it's somewhat of a similar question. So, what type of things would you have been able to do at 680, say in 2018, 2019, that maybe events or whatever? Like, what type of things would did you not get to do in 2020 and on that you used to be able to do?
Yeah, we're a big event station where we have huge tailgates and parties, for Falcons games, United games, and things like that. So we weren't able to do that. That was an immediate pause to that. And I think with everything happening in late February, early March, it was before baseball had fully got going, and we are flagship of the Atlanta Braves, so we're always actively involved in activation at the ballpark. So luckily, with football, just winding down, baseball not yet started, we weren't in a spot where, we had to hit an immediate pause. We were kind of in what we like to call our lull or off season before things ramped back up for baseball. But, those tailgates are a big thing every week. College football, we were known for, going out to bars and broadcasting on Saturdays and Sundays for, college and NFL weekends, along with those tailgates for Falcons games and even some Georgia Bulldogs games. And, we really missed out on being able to do that last year.
Okay, so now a little bit different. So, what has like been calling like sports, like live games, been a pandemic? I've heard a lot of stories of remote or maybe on site. It is really varied a lot. What has it been like for you personally?
Yeah, so been able to call some basketball for Kennesaw State. We're still able to go to the arena, but we are socially distant. We're away from all the athletes. A lot of things have been broken up in the tier levels. Like tier one is tested almost every day and things like that. Tier two and tier three. So we're at the back end, so we stay away from those guys and girls who've been tested weekly, daily, and things like that. So we're on an elevated perch. I'm used to calling basketball courtside and things like that, a lot more, off of a monitor than, watching it up close and in person. But, lucky enough for me, basketball has been the only thing that has really been altered. We're getting ready to start spring football, and that's going to be a little bit different, playing FCS football. But, we are trained to try to overcome these challenges, and I think that's the true test of a broadcaster. You don't necessarily train to call the games. You're trained to call the variables that go around the game, and I think that was just one of the variables that we all had to deal with. And it's something that you have to get used to it quickly. You can't dwell on it because the end user doesn't care. They don't care where you're calling the game from. If you're back at a secondary location calling the game off of monitors, if you're there not in your traditional spot, they don't care if your broadcast partner is not sitting next to you. they're tuning into the game for whatever reason that they're tuning into the game. And 9 times out of 10, that's to be informed and to have the broadcast call add something to what they're watching.
So how would your, and if any, would your preparation process change? Whether that's since maybe normally you'd have talked to coaches in person, like is there a lot of, how much difference is there in preparation for
You,
games?
you know, the people who prepare, almost to excess. I don't think they necessarily had to alter, too much. I think you have to get used to, picking up little things, especially if you're calling a game off of a monitor. Let's say you're calling football off of a monitor, which a lot of, FBS football games got called off of monitors. If you don't have that all 22 camera, you better be, resolved and resolute in those formations. And when you see a team line up, you better know the personnel that's normally in the game, because you don't have that advantage at looking at, the wide receiver that's on near side, because he may not be on TV camera. And if you don't have an all 22 shot, the over the top shot looking down, you don't know. Also, you don't necessarily, have numbers at the ready. That's the one thing that I think is the biggest difference from, calling a game in person to watching it at home. When you're in person, generally we can see all the numbers just fine on the uniforms. When you're, calling the game off of a monitor, I don't care if you're calling the game off of a 55-inch TV, an 80-inch TV. There are things that, you miss out on. And 9 times out of 10, it is the number of the uniform. So those are the things you have to pick up on. And that starts in the prep process, knowing personnel, knowing scenarios, picking up on any little thing if you're watching film on what can distinguish one player from another. You look at football offensive linemen. Sometimes it's really hard to tell them apart if you can't see the number. They're all big dudes. So just trying to pick up on little things like that. Receivers coming in and out of the game. Some teams will run out 5-6 receivers a game. So you have to be aware of personnel, formations. This is what, I saw out of, let's take Georgia or Georgia Tech, for example. This is what I saw out of them, and this is the personnel they generally have on the field. And that way, if they're going towards, a blind TV spot that you don't see later, you at least have a general idea of, okay, it's one of these people that are making the catch. And then you pick up that distinguishing factor, and that's the person.
Okay, so now I'm gonna go kind of all the way back to the beginning. So first of all, kind of which sports market did you grow up in, and kind of which teams did you root for as a kid?
So I grew up in New York City. I have a New York City landscape behind me. Big Yankees fan. Baseball was my number one. Grew up loving the Yankees. You weren't allowed to like the Mets between my dad and my grandfather. A couple of my uncles on my dad's side loved the Mets, but you know what? I was never raised to be a Mets fan. You had to like the Yankees, and with that, I grew up in an era where Braves games were on Turner TBS, so I got to watch a lot of Braves games too. So, the Braves were my favorite NL team. I grew up liking the Cubs on the NL side, but I was a Yankees fan through and through. And then football gets kind of weird because my dad served in the Air Force. So in the Air Force, you only got two teams, the Vikings and the Cowboys. So his brother, who served in the military with him, is a Vikings fan. My dad's a Cowboys fan. He raised me as a Cowboys fan. My grandfather, who I'm close with, is a Giants fan. And I guess I was just, one of those kids that just like to anger grandpa. So I was a Cowboys fan just to make him mad because I could get him to react to it. So, Yankees and Cowboys kind of weird. My sister's a freshman at Florida State University. So, big Florida State fan, but Kennesaw State, athletics also. But growing up, I was a hardcore Yankees fan.
And I guess who would have been your favorite Yankees players growing up, since it may have been when during their dynasty?
Yeah, it was. I was lucky enough to grow up in the glory years and not so much, I was born in 88, but the early 80s, they were actually pretty bad. So I grew up with the Jeters, the Posada. Bernie Williams was actually my favorite Yankee. So those guys were in there. You had guys like when Mike Mussina came over from Baltimore, but growing up a fan of baseball, I tried to model myself out of guys like Tony Gwynn, and two strikes meant nothing to you. You can always still get a hit, choke up on the bat, just try to put it where they're not. Cal Ripken, keep showing up, and that whole mindset of you just showed up and played the game. And I think my biggest baseball moment for, a long period of my life was the Cal Ripken when he ended up breaking the streak. I remember watching that with my grandfather, and just that moment of one man just kept showing up to play ball and ended up breaking the one record that everybody thought wouldn't, be broken. Just, those type of things. So tying to that, but on the Yankees, of course, it has to be Jeter because he is El Capitan, but Bernie Williams was up there, Jorge Posada, and those type of guys, and then Mariano Rivera, Inner Sandman, just the mystique of it all.
And who were like your favorite sports broadcasters as a kid? Could be local, national, TV, radio, all sorts of kind.
Yeah, I grew up, the Harry Careys of the world, like I mentioned, with WGN having the Cubs games. You get the Ernie Johnsons, and everybody on the Braves, the Pete Van Reerens. I remember, a lot of Pete's calls. You get Chip Carey, Skip Carey. I grew up with all those national guys. To me, Stuart Scott, he was so smooth in doing Sports Center. But locally it was John Sterling and Michael Kay on Yankee games, and you get the Yankees win type stuff. And, I get it. If you're not a Yankees fan, you don't necessarily like it. You think it's a little hokey, but, I grew up with that. But, you know, I always gravitated towards the guys who made it fun to watch and listen to the game. So, Mike Tirico, I always thought was a great broadcaster. He just had a way of just making broadcasts fun. So guys like that, I have tremendous respect for.
Okay, and who would you be your favorite broadcasters now that you're a professional?
I love the versatile guys. You see Chris Myers. He's doing play-by-play of NFL games. He's hosting, NASCAR races on Fox. You get Ryan Rucco, who calls basketball, baseball, WNBA. Adam Amin. Those type of guys who love to do it all. Gus Johnson. He has that shtick, but it's fun. It makes things, enjoyable. You get the Fowlers and the Reese Davises who just add the mystique. I'm a huge Brad Nessler guy. And again, going back to the previous question, I grew up with guys like Keith Jackson and Brett Musburger, who had the gravitas of calling like major bowl games and always calling that major moment. So, those guys who get to do it now, Fowler, Joe Buck is a very good broadcaster who has, those moments, at hand. And Jim Nantz, huge fan of those guys. But I love guys like Ryan Rucco, Adam Amin, who call other sports, and you can tell that they enjoy calling other sports.
So this is a little bit of a different question, and I hope I'm right here. This is according to your LinkedIn profile. So you worked at Staples as a computer technician for about 2 years, November 07 to November 09. What made you want to change careers?
So it goes back to like the whole of, changing processors, coding websites. That's kind of like a lot of what I was doing. And, it was fun, but I wasn't loving what I was doing. Had an opportunity, to continue, broadcasting with the radio station. And I just went all in. At some point I was just like, you know what, I may be able to go back and do this. I don't know, but while I can, just go all in.
And I guess what made you want to be a sports broadcaster? Do you think about it as a kid, or is it more towards maybe your high school, college days, whatever?
So my family tells me the story. When I was a kid, I used to sit on the floor in front of the TV, and I'm probably like 4 or 5 years old, and I'm calling the games off of the TV as a kid on the floor. I'm sure it was really annoying for all of them, trying to watch a game and then I'm doing my own commentary. But, that was one of the things I almost loved calling the games more than playing it. And, I think it goes back to, you know, growing up in New York City, you didn't really have a lot of different sports, basketball, football. You never played hockey really. There was, a small grouping. Um, Football was really tough. High school football is now recently a thing that's growing in the Northeast. So, Pop Warner wasn't necessarily a thing, and, rec league football and things like that. So it was just a way to have access to a lot more sports, and just sitting on the floor calling the games myself, I guess, was that.
And I noticed there was a overlap of your kind of early radio days at Columbus Media, and also as a technician. So how are you able to juggle two jobs at once?
A lot of
Not
faking
more.
sick to get out of work at Staples. There was a lot of, oh, I got can't come into work and I'm doing other things. I'm calling games for Cumulus. I'm calling, you know, whatever I can do, radio wise. But yeah, after a while they caught on. I think they really caught on one morning. I was working on a morning show here in Atlanta called The Burt Show. And I think, I'd called out of work at Staples to go in to The Burt Show, and I did a segment on the air. And then I got called out about it at Staples, and it was just like, yeah, I really don't want to be here. I'd rather be doing radio.
Okay, so did you have to tell Staples that you're leaving and you just wanted to do radio? Was it hard to tell them at all?
Oh, it wasn't hard at all. It was actually very easy. It was very easy to do that. I mean, I think a lot of people understood. I love doing radio. I liked getting paid to go to work for Staples. It was good money, not even a lot. But, if you're young and you have the opportunity, for a long time, it was, I was a burden on friends and family. And to a certain extent, I still feel that way now. But, I had an opportunity to go do what I love, and I went and I did it. And, to my family's credit, to my friends, none of them, really, told me, you have to make money and things like that. My family, my brother, my mom, my dad, everybody, they supported me through all this. A lot of my closest best friends, you work early years in radio, radio's built on intern. Radio is built on free labor. And you work a couple of years as an intern, you don't have money coming in and all your friends want to go hang out and you can't afford to go out. And I had some great friends that were like, yeah, come out anyway. Don't worry about it. We'll cover the bill and things like that. And, everybody, had to contribute to get to this point. I feel just in my success.
And what risks did you feel you're taking when you decided to leave? Maybe a steady computer job for maybe the unknown of radio.
Oh yeah, it could have all, and I thought it was going to end at various points, and then you just like, what do you do? It's just you're jumping without a safety net, and you know what? It was thrilling at times, also scary. Not even gonna lie, but you just have to trust on your ability and the support of others, and then you land. And if you're gonna fail, just try to fail forward. That's the best advice I can always tell people. If you're gonna fail, just try to fail forward. Don't ever go back.
Which valuable skills did you learn in your early days of radio that you still apply to today?
The storytelling aspect of it, when you work like one of those morning shows, and everybody in every market has one that brings the lifestyle. It's about telling the story. It's about being engaging. It's about you know getting people invested in you. And it's also to a certain extent about brevity, about telling your story in the least amount of words possible, but getting the most out of them. So I was able to learn those things. I was able to learn, one of the first things I ever learned working in that type of morning show radio, it was sometimes you don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, because at the end of the day, you're there to entertain people. And those are things that I'm taking into calling games. At the core, we're here to entertain people, we're here to inform people, and those are the two core principles. And you have to say a lot, and sometimes the least amount of words.
So after being with Columbus for a while, what was your process to kind of moving over to 680 the fan? Like, how did that process work?
So it's funny. They actually moved into our building. So, we had a cluster of, I think at the time, 3 or 4 radio stations, and then they're a separate company, but the ownership to their company and our company were brothers. So they ended up moving into our building, and I got to just know a lot of the show hosts. I got to know a lot of the people over there. I was like, I really want to be doing this. I actually applied to be an intern for 680 before going to Q100, and they denied me. They weren't taking interns at the time. So I went to Q100, a lot of experience there in promotions and on air. And then I told them that's what I wanted to do. And it was basically, I had to hit the reset button again. I had to intern, work for free, produce a couple of shows for little or no money, and prove yourself. And that's all, sometimes you just want, and that's all sometimes you need, an opportunity just to prove yourself.
And what did your very early days at 680 look like? Like maybe some of your first few roles.
So it was filling in for whatever producer was on vacation, whatever, engineer was on vacation. And that was just kind of sometimes you would work the morning show for 3 or 4 days and then you would work afternoon drive. And, you know, you got to work with a lot of different shows, but it was weekend shows also. Sometimes you got called in to do, Saturday 7 to 9, and then another show, 10 to 1, and things like that. So it was basically whatever they need you to do to run a board. Sometimes you were there at night, overnight. Sometimes you're there just to clear, paid programming, public affairs and things like that. So whatever they needed me to do, I was game for. There was one day I worked every show on the station, from our afternoon drive all the way through PM drive. There were times when, you get in there, 6 p.m., you didn't leave until 1 a.m., just because there were things going on, cutting up audio and things like that. So those are the type of things, you get your foot in the door and you just jump at everything. I never said no, I don't think.
So another interesting thing I found out, and I hope I'm right. This is according to LinkedIn. What was your experience like with Owl Radio, say at school, and then did you also call sports as well at the
Yeah,
same time?
so
Like,
it's funny. My brother was the general manager of Owl Radio there. So, you know, that was a place where everybody hung out at. Like it was very little productive activities going on. And I think that's the case at most college radio stations. Like there's very little like productive things going on. We're all just hanging out. And then you look up, you're like, oh, I'm supposed to do a show, or oh, I'm supposed to go to class. I guess I'll do that, the show, not ever go to class. But that's kind of what it was. But we had an opportunity to call some men's basketball game. And it was a very easy criteria. They looked at us and they said, we'll give you an opportunity to call games, but you better take it seriously. Scott Whitlock was the associate athletic director. So he let us call some baseball, softball, and basketball. And he said, you better take this seriously. And that was the thing that really registered home. Like they're going to give us a chance to do this. And, the opportunity to, get good tape and have a chance to call games, even though we weren't getting paid for it, you couldn't have told us otherwise. We thought we were hit the big leagues, but as long as we took it seriously, and that's what really made us, in those moments take it seriously. But it was, and I'll tell you this, being in radio and broadcasting for as long as I have, the most creative I felt was there with the people that I was around, because there was no pressure. There was no pressure to fail. There was no pressure to succeed. I mean, by no means were there even a path to be successful in that realm, because it was internet radio. It wasn't even like you had a small signal to broadcast on. So the only people listening were your friends, your family, if they could figure out how to log on at the right time. And, that was just so much fun because, you didn't have to worry about anything. You weren't trying to appease people. You didn't necessarily, think a big time opportunity was going to come. You just had fun doing something that you thought was cool, and it led the environment to creativity. And we had a boatload of fun doing it.
okay, so now like compare like what Owl Radio is like and what 680 is like. Since you said Owl Radio can be laid back at times.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, radio in itself is laid back and relaxed compared to most corporate jobs. But at the end of the day, there is a focus. There is professionalism to a certain extent. I mean, I can go into work wearing sweatpants 4 days a week. Nobody says anything. We are kind of relaxed in that sense, is we don't have to dress up to go to work. Food shows up and everybody's digging into it. We have a soda machine. Not like you have to go pay dollar bills to get soda. No, you just stick your cup under a fountain machine and you drink all the soda you want and things like that. So it is different in that sense, but there always is an era of professionalism. We're located right across the street from Truist Park where the Braves play. We can look out that window and know, you know what, that's business for us. And we take it seriously. At the end of the day, everybody who comes into that building, whether we're casual, in the break areas, prepping the shows in the control rooms, when you go into that studio and you turn those mics on, it is professional from start to finish. And even when it doesn't sound professional, even when it sounds loose and fun and unscripted, which I mean, we don't, only thing scripted on our stations are our spots, but even when it sounds like, oh man, they're just, no direction and things like that, we're still professional. We still know what we can and can't say, what we can and can't do. At our radio, there was zero professionalism. You're not supposed to say it, we said it. You're not supposed to do it, we did it. You know, at one point there was a show on called How I Met Your Mother, and they had this thing going on the show called a slap bet challenge, and we replicated that, and people were getting slapped on our radio just out of the blue and things like that. I've gotten almost into fist fights with coworkers who are still close friends at our radio. Those type of things don't work in real radio and the professional environments and things like that. So but you have to look at it for what it was, and perspective after the fact, almost 10 years later, I mean, it was fun, but definitely lacked that professionalism.
Okay, so you mentioned daily shows. So what's the challenge of 5 days a week, kind of coming up with new information and kind of preparing and putting shows together at 680?
So it's great when you have, hosts that love to take that alternate perspective. And if you have a host that, watches games differently than the average fan, then it makes your life 20, 30, 40, 50 times easier than somebody who just wants to watch the game like a fan and then talk about it. And I think that's the tough part, ins and out. There are some days when sports are light, there's not a lot going on. So you have to watch games differently to figure out different angles. You have to broaden your horizons. And that's some of the toughest things that, we can all watch the same game and we can all resolve that, this game is horrible. Like, what can we talk about from this game? But you have to find something to talk about, whether it's a third down play or a specific player and things like that. And that comes from start to finish watching game differently. I know many of hosts who take notes while they're watching a game, of every little thing. And, you can develop topics off of that. So the toughest thing is, as a producer, working with the host and bringing ideas to the table that are, not the conventional stuff. If, the Falcons go 0 for 5 on third down, everybody knows that. So what's the talking points in there? What's the conversation to be had there? How can you make, if there's nothing Georgia Bulldogs related going on, how do you make something about Missouri interesting to a Atlanta listener? Those are some of the challenges day in, day out, And, when you have great hosts that look at the producers like, okay, you're of equal standing, you're of equal knowledge, you're of equal voice behind the scenes. We're just the people that talk about it on the air. You can have some great conversations. So, when it's going good, it's a lot of, the natural conversations that we have off the air or in group text that just happen to go on the air also, that are the most engaging. But it does get tough sometimes.
What would be your best resource materials for shows? I mean, obviously there's the internet, Atlanta Journal, and probably a lot of sources.
Yeah, I think the two biggest sources that most, give us, content are Twitter. Fans will tell you on Twitter, what they like, what they don't like, what they feel, what they see about a specific game. And also, yourself, at the end of the day, you still have to be a fan of sports. You still have to wonder about sports. You have to, want to consume knowledge and be curious about sports. So that is a big pulse of it too. Odds are, if I'm curious about something, somebody, a good amount of, the listening masses will be interested in it also. So you have to want to trust yourself in the fact that I know sports. We just watch sports a little bit differently than the regular fan. The Cleveland Browns fan is irrational. They think week 1 of the NFL season, we're going to the Super Bowl. People in sports media, we look at it differently. We go and we look at it ahead of time and go, this team has no chance. Don't waste your time. So we have to watch things a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, we're sports fans too. So when we wonder why Kirby Smart put Justin Fields as the up back on a fake punt, you're wondering that too. We can all go from there. But there are things that we get, off of Twitter that we see people wondering too. Why do the Braves do this? The batting Freddie second versus third debate. That's what we bring to the table, and we hope to bring a little bit different knowledge point, a little bit, more educated point than the average fan has.
So I would say now, so still at 680, and so you used to do a pregame for the Braves. So what was the process like that during the daily 162 baseball season, nonstop 6 months?
It's fun because of the people that you're working with. Our Braves Radio Network crew in our studio is great. I mean, we had Ben Ingram, who calls games too, hosts our pregame, Chris Domino, who's a wealth of knowledge, Buck Ballou, Mark Lemke, and the guys behind the scenes. I've worked with, the most talent in any radio station are the people that you don't get to hear about. So the guys behind the scenes, Kevin D'Amicos, Chris Caldwell's, Cam Carruth, Bradley Gentry, those are some of my closest friends still to this day, because we all spend time locked in these little control rooms together, editing highlights. And Kevin McAlpin, who is our Braves reporter, is great too. They make life so much easier, and you make these prep sheets, and it's lineups, injuries, pitching matchups, and day in, day out. When you play a team four days in a row, it gets kind of redundant after a while. So you have to find other ways to make it interesting to yourself in terms of a pregame perspective. How can we take this angle, make it different? Come September, you look at a matchup and it's, Ace versus September call up. We know that the odds aren't going to be in that person's favor, but what can we add to prepare you? And we make no qualms about it in the imaging of it to prepare you for tonight's contest. That's what we're doing in pregame. We're going to give you the lineups. We're going to have Brian Snicker audio. We're going to have pitching. We're going to have injuries. We're going to have other notes from around the league. And we're going to give you basically that media guide for you to listen to the game on your way, wherever you're going in your car or even at home.
So how do you, since I know you have a busy schedule, so how do you manage to do all the KSU sports? I believe you do pro lacrosse, the daily shows, obviously for years the Braves game, and also a lot of high school sports. Like, how do you juggle everything and still be able to perform well for every game?
You just gotta don't worry about anything else. Like, if I'm preparing for a lacrosse game, I'm focused on preparing for the lacrosse game. I think your performance dwindles when you start worrying about those outside factors. So while I'm preparing for lacrosse, whether it's an hour I have, 2 hours, 3 hours, or the whole night, I'm going to consume myself with that. And then I got to stop. I got to get to a point where I can stop and then do something else. When you get to those points where you're trying to do too much and it overlaps because you're worried about, oh, I can't let this slip. I can't let, a lot of it is time management. And a lot of it is budgeting out time. Hey, I may only have, 2 hours to prepare for a lacrosse game, but that's why I start preparing for games, the week of the game. If I have a Saturday game, I start preparing on Monday. And there's no shame in dragging that out. Some people really enjoy the last minute, preparing for a game. And sometimes that's all the schedule allows them to do. I like to try to budget out, even if it's only 45 minutes to read something, gain some knowledge, gain some perspective that I can make notes on. That way, when it comes time to finalize spotting boards and things like that, it makes it a little bit easier because I'm able to do all those things by totally committing myself for however much time I have. And, the calendar on my phone is my friend. Sometimes I make notes on, this is what you have to do today. And you just check through them, and you just have to power on through and just be aware of everything else going on, but commit yourself to whatever you're doing.
So here's kind of an interesting question. So year 2019, everything was on regular schedule. How many games / events / obligations think you had in total that year?
So the last regular year of broadcasting, I think I did 80 some odd games. that I called, I think it was up in the 80s. It was anywhere from 70 to 80 some odd games that I called across, I think, 8 different sports. So I think that was the regular year for me. It was, lacrosse, basketball, men's and women's, football. You get soccer in there, high school, college, when you break it all down, by professional level. I've called a lot of weird things like the Alliance of American Football. You get to call those type of games. So you get to do some really cool things, and sometimes you get a call out of the blue and just like, hey, do you know how to call hockey? Sure, I'll go call a hockey game. I'm down for it. So the numbers get up there, and I need to be better about tracking the exact numbers and how many different sports. But I think that last full year was 80 some odd across 8 different sports.
So, like, how do you prioritize? Since I'm sure if there's 162 Braves games, I'm sure you might have to miss a couple to call this or call that, and maybe in the fall, maybe at football. So, how do you prioritize games, and how often you have to miss games
It
sometimes?
it all goes back to everybody that gets you to that point. It's not just yourself. The team that we have working with the Braves, anytime I told them, hey, I have to go on the road with Kennesaw and things like that, cool, don't worry. I broke my leg in 2019, July of 2019, and it was a tough 8 weeks for it, but the teammates, my teammates at the radio station picked up all the slack for me. And, you try to be a good teammate, and that gets paid back to you. And that's really what it was. It was never a question of, how do I have to divvy up my time when it came to that, because the teammates there looking, at what I had to do and get, oh, I got that. Don't worry about Braves. We have that cover and things like that. Focus on calling games for Kennesaw. Focus on getting ready for the lacrosse game, things like that. Everybody just tries to make each other's life easier. And I try to be a good teammate to those guys and even my broadcast partners. If I can make their lives easier, I'm all for it. I try to prepare to do their job also, not in a disrespectful way, but in case something happens, I owe it to my producers. I owe it to our engineers. I owe it to the people I'm calling games for. If something happens and I'm not able to fill into that role because, my broadcast partner can't be there, I need to be able to do their job too. No broadcast should fail because the talent can't do their job correctly, or the talent can't be there to do their job. Things happen in life. Who knows? And but 1,000 people sometimes on these major broadcasts work so hard to get these on the air. And it all comes down. The end result is just normally 2 people, sometimes 3 if you have a good broadcast team and they actually include the reporter, the sideline analyst, the field level analyst in the broadcasting, lexicon. I think we had a couple during these remote times where the field level analyst, the sideline reporter, had to call play by play because computers went down and things like that. That's why your reporter is equally as important as the play by play or the color analyst. But I owe it to everybody else who works on these broadcasts, and everybody's going to be listening, to be prepared to do any job and try to be a good teammate to help my broadcast partner. And I'm thankful and I'm fortunate to have great teammates that have helped me be able to fulfill all my obligations also.
And you say you do a lot of different sports. So, how does your preparation method vary for different sports? Since obviously football is probably the most preparation, and then for the Braves, you could go on and on and on the internet looking for information. And then you also do like high school sports. So, how do your methods vary for different sports or levels?
For high school sports, it is the toughest because we don't know if people are keeping accurate records, if at all, of player statistics and things like that. So for high school, you have to find what you can find. You have to source a lot of your material. We've always tried, and it's kind of a respectful grouping of other broadcasters. We all kind of have each other's numbers or emails in case we need to reach out and ask questions. hey, have you seen this team play? What can we expect from them? I got a text from somebody in South Georgia reaching out, hey, have you seen this team play basketball this year? We're getting ready to play them. I need whatever information you have on them. So we have other broadcasters in like a little group chat thing that we can always tap on each other in case we need it. Um, so that's for high school, and that's where the toughest thing comes in. You don't necessarily get a lot of footage to go off of. So a lot of high school, you're identifying certain players, and no disrespect to the left guard who probably won't go play college football. But if the right guard is, we're going to pay more attention to him. We're going to watch that, the quarterbacks, the receivers, and things like that. And I've covered high school football for just as long as I've been in media. A lot of the teams, a lot of the coaches. That's what you really have to start learning, the coaches, because local high school X isn't really going to go around changing their offense too much. Credit to high school coaches and their stubbornness. There are some high school coaches in the state of Georgia that still run wing T, and they're not going to go away from it, and they never will. And it's tried, tested, and true for them. So we're able to go off of that. For sports like football, Kennesaw State games, I watch as much film as I can on the opponent. I get to see the Owls up close and personal. I've called their games. I know those guys on the rosters. I know what they're able to do. So if we're playing an opponent, Weber State was the last game that they played in the 2019 season in the FCS playoffs. I probably watched 10 Weber State games back and forth. And, if a game takes 3 hours, I'm watching it 2 times through. I'm watching it to pay attention to the defense, pay attention to the offense, pay attention to certain players that I'm reading about and other things that I hear. They're dudes. You got to watch them. You got to see. And I want to see what makes them so special. I try to find, overall what they're going to do defensively, what they're going to do offensively. And then I try to find, okay, who's their best player and why is he their best player? What makes this player special? Lacrosse is a lot of the same way. And working with the National Lacrosse League, which I'm still new to the game of professional lacrosse. And when I got brought on to call these games, I was very honest. I know how to give a good broadcast. I know the rules of lacrosse. I'm not going to be the best analyst to start out. And they said, don't worry about it. Learn. As long as you put in the time and you learn. And we have some of the best broadcasters in the National Lacrosse League that are very kind with their time and their knowledge, and they share it. And the league as a whole, I think with the Georgia Swarm, our guy that we work with directly, his name is Ty Merrow, one of the best dudes I've ever worked with, a wealth of knowledge. And I'm calling a game, I'm getting ready for a game. He's feeding me information, and he doesn't necessarily want the credit. He deserves a lot of the credit. Every time they pick up one of our calls, me and Chris Mooneyham, I've worked with Chris Mooneyham for 6-7 years now, so we work well together. Every time they pick up one of our calls, it's only probably because Ty has helped us get to that point. So a lot of the prep work comes from just watching and consuming as much as I can do from it and making notes. And the prep process is relatively close to the same across all sports. And then, you can't be shy of watching how other people do it. Cadence. The cadence of calling a lacrosse game is different than calling a football game, than calling a baseball game. So you have to pick up on those cadences. And for me, pronunciation is key. At the very least, I owe it to every one of these players and their mama, their daddy, and their cousin, and whoever may be listening. I'm going to try to get your name right. I owe that to you. That's the least thing that I can do. I may be a horrible broadcaster calling what's going on, but when I say your person's name, I'm going to try to get it right. And sometimes that's tough. I called the Kennesaw State volleyball game, and there are a lot of vowels back to back to back in orders that I've never seen before in my life. And you just spend a lot of time. Okay, how do you say this person's name? Now, to every entity that gives out an opponent's media guide, bless you. Thank you, because you get a lot of information from those media guides. A college football game that, Kennesaw State was up 53-7. You're going through that media guide and you're looking, okay, 77 was not even on my 4 deep. So what's this guy name? Where does he come from? Oh, I got a stat about, his dad was a contract. Okay. And then you're just reading. You're reading off of the media guide. You get pronunciations off the media guides. You get little nuggets from media guides and things like that too.
So one thing I heard about, which that seems like a great experience. And what was the process like when you called, I think this past year, 6 high school football games in the state championship in 3 days? How did that work? And how are you doing all this prep work? And how much did you sleep during that time?
Didn't sleep a lot, and that was the biggest thing. It was 2 games a day for 3 days. So luckily, I had the first game and the last game. The first game I was the analyst. The last game I was sidelined. So I was able to just day by day just get like a base. So I wanted the night before to have the first game done, spotting boards and everything. So had all my information there. And then the night before the game, I wanted to have the first game done, and then the second game, just the framework of, if I'm going to be on sidelines, what do I need to watch for? Players. If there's a human interest piece, one of our games was Grayson High School. So making sure I was well versed in Jake Garcia's story and things like that. Those type of things. Just have a framework. And then in between the first and third game, while that second game was going on, just hit the books, hit the notes, and figure out if there's anything else I was missing to fill in that gap. And then you go home and you do it for the next day. After the last game, it was just kind of like, is this it? Are we done? And then you get home that night and you're tired, you're worn out at that point, but it's just kind of like, I want to do it again. It's the amount of time and the lack of sleep, it does not, affect the joy that you have, the entertainment that you have, and the rush that you have calling these games.
So you've called so many games so far. What has been the best game you have ever called? Could be in any level order.
That's tough. I called the game for Kennesaw State. It was actually the anniversary of this. I think it was February 20th. It may have been 18 or 17, 2018, 2017. Kennesaw State women's basketball. I actually made it on the top 10 of ESPN. I've been on it twice. Kennesaw State scores the game tying basket with like 0.2 seconds left on, a crazy shot. Game goes into overtime. Kennesaw State takes the lead on a layup. The North Alabama Lions go to inbound the ball. The clock doesn't run, and then it starts running late, and they're dribbling around trying to get the ball past half court. The referee notices the clock didn't start on time, calls timeout. They take the stopwatch out, and I look at my broadcast partner, and I was like, they're going to end this game on a review of the clock. And the referee looks over at the North Alabama head coach and calls her over, calls Kennesaw State's head coach, Agnes Baronato, over, and they tell Agnes, the game's done. She starts jumping up and down. The North Alabama coach, she's perplexed. And the game ended on a game-winning layup and then a referee clock review that ended the game. So that was probably one of the most entertaining games I called. And then one very early in my career, we were calling I think it was a high school basketball showcase. And this clip actually made it on front page of Yahoo Sports. That MTV Ridiculousness show with Rob Dyrdek, and it was everywhere. Not top 10, actually. It made, I think it was like number 2 on not top 10. You hate it for the kid. He actually got the inbounds pass and was disoriented and scored the game-winning basket on the wrong basket. So he scored the game-winning basket for the opponent. And that was probably the weirdest game that I've ever called. But those two have been up there. Kennesaw State, when they won the playoff game over Wofford, was pretty cool also.
So I got about 2 left for you. So I want to ask, so what events have you either not covered yet, or what type of jobs in broadcasting you've not had yet that you hope to have in the future?
Auto racing. I love racing. Whether it's IndyCar, I think I want to go to the Indy 500, but I would love to get to call the Indy 500. Any NASCAR race, Formula One, I think would be so interesting to call just because the worldwide appeal of Formula One. But if I got to call anything racing related, I would sign up for it in a heartbeat. That has to be up there. And, in moments and things like that, I want to call a Major League Baseball game. I've called college, high school. I really want to do just one Major League Baseball game. I got to call a game at a Major League Baseball park, and you asked me about games and things that, reign supreme in my memory. I forgot, but it has to be up there. Kennesaw State playing at SunTrust Park at the time, now Truist Park, against Jacksonville State. That game went to 5 overtimes. Just the craziest environment I've ever been in. So I got to call a college football game in a Major League Baseball park, but to get to call an MLB game would be kind of cool. Um, Anything Olympic related too. I think, the Olympics, for me growing up in my era, the Olympics, I don't know if it's still this way and you're younger than me, if the Olympics still have that appeal, that moment, that gravitas to it. I would love to do something Olympics related. I think Dale Earnhardt Jr., who retired race car driver now, broadcast games on races on NBC. He got to go over as part of NBC having the Olympics. He got to go over to one of the Olympic games, and he said it's as cool as you imagine it as a kid. So I would love to get to call just something related to the Olympics, just because it is for pride for country and things like that. Um, World Cup too. I think anything that has nations attached to it, where you are able to go behind your country, I think you get more out of that call. I remember when U.S. women's national team won the first Women's World Cup. Brandy Chastain on the PK. I would have loved to call that moment. I think it was JP Dellacamera was the play-by-play guy on that call. Just an amazing call. Landon Donovan scoring that golden goal, I believe it was against Ghana in the World Cup. Abby Wambach, the super header, coming in to the very next Women's World Cup after the Landon Donovan goal. So anything that has the country attached to it is probably be really cool also.
And this is the last one I have, and just thank you so much for this time. So what would be your advice for young people? Could be like my self, who are trying to get into broadcasting or trying to build a career in it.
So never say no. If somebody asks you to do something and you have the ability to do it from a physical sense, if you can physically be there to do it, do it. Doesn't matter how good or bad you're going to be. No matter how many times you say yes, most people in this industry only remember the one time you say no. Prep work is your friend. There is no such thing as being over prepared. I am guilty of wanting to prepare to no end because I fear failure. Even if you're going to fail forward, I still feel that failure. And it's going to be that one thing that I didn't have, that I saw and I said, no, that's not important. That's going to be the one thing that comes up in the game. And I'm just left, I don't know. And things like that. So that was huge for me. And I know you asked for one, but I'm just going to start listing off things. But these are just things that have impacted me, and I have had to learn. I'm still learning to this day. And that's another one. Never stop learning. I hate the sound of my own voice, but you have to be able to air check yourself. You have to be able to give yourself honest criticism. You have to be able to take criticism. You have to be able to have that one person who is going to tell you, you did not have a good broadcast tonight. Nothing personal, but you just take it away and you get better from that. You have to be able to listen to yourself and listen back and go, I could have been better there. You don't want to be hypercritical of yourself, because at the end of the day, we are our own worst critic. When you work in radio, particularly, and you hear silence for 2 seconds, it's the end of the world for you, because in radio, just what we do in radio, most people live their lives in terms of, big picture, months, weeks, days. We live our lives to seconds, to milliseconds, and things like that. So we hear 2 seconds of silence and it might as well be the end of the world. But to that regular listener, it's nothing to them. Another big thing is do justice to whatever you're calling. I've talked to many of broadcasters that almost feel disrespected to call, Olympic sports or women's athletics. You are not better than that. Because at the end of the day, I take so much joy in calling Kennesaw State women's basketball, because I do have 2 younger sisters. Both played soccer. One is in high school playing soccer right now, and they work hard. They work just as hard as the male basketball players, and they get no regard. They don't get the same level of exposure on ESPN or any broadcast outlet. So I'm going to go in there, I'm going to prepare, and I'm going to try to call their games like it is the most important game, because it is the most important game. They may have family, don't get to show up to the game, especially during these times, get to show up to their games and watch their loved ones. So they're relying on me to be prepared to give them an entertaining and informative broadcast. You are not above any athletics or athlete that you are calling, and be respectful of the game. If you truly want to be a sports broadcaster, you have to respect all sports that you are calling. You have to respect the people participating in the sport. And that goes with things like respecting how they pronounce their name. It may look, like O'Brien. We had a game one time, it was spelled like you would O'Brien. It was O'Brien. Just do your best, and nobody's going to fault you if it's some small thing. But as long as you treat it with respect, and if you find out during the broadcast, we've had a couple of times I've said something wrong during the broadcast, call yourself out on it. People, you're not supposed to be a mythical figure as a broadcaster. You're human. And I think people engage with that too. Kennesaw State women's game, we have a player, Julia Rodriguez. There was at one point, I kept calling her Julia Roberts for some reason. I don't know why. I had not watched Pretty Woman or anything like that, Runaway Bride. And then our producer, great producer, Will Adams, gets in my ear and he's like, Julia Rodriguez, stop calling her Julia Roberts. And I was like, I guess I have been. So we just made fun of it. And I think people laugh about that kind of stuff because it would happen. It could happen, and I don't think people take themselves way too seriously when they're calling these games because they're all looking for that marquee moment. No, know what, if something special happens, what you would want to say, especially if it's, somebody's senior night, if it is a big game, know what you're going to say, but don't live or broadcast to a script. People see right through that. Just be genuine.
Well, Brandon, it's been a great interview, and thank you so much for the time, and hope to see you down the road.
Thank you, brother. Yeah, hope to see you soon. Hopefully we can all get together and hang out soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. I'll save it.